remember the exact sound the door made the first time she stepped into our home. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. Just a soft click of wood meeting metal, like a whisper slipping into a quiet room. But even now, when I close my eyes, that small sound echoes louder than thunder in my memory. I was sitting by the window, knitting a sweater I would never finish. At my age, you start many things knowing time might interrupt you before you're done. The afternoon sun lay across the living room floor like warm honey. The house smelled of boiled rice and soap, the familiar scent of a life built slowly over decades. It was a peaceful day, the kind that tricks you into believing peace is permanent. Then my son Daniel cleared his throat in the doorway. "Mom," he said gently, "this is Miriam. She'll be helping around the house." I looked up and saw her standing just behind him, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She was younger than I expected, maybe in her early 30s. Her face was calm, almost too calm, like a lake without ripples. She wore a simple dress, clean but worn at the edges, and her eyes moved quickly around the room, observing everything without seeming rude. I smiled politely. In my long life, I had learned that the people who say the least often carry the heaviest stories. "Welcome," I told her. "Any friend of my son is welcome here." She nodded. "Thank you, ma'am," she said softly. Her voice was steady, but there was a tiredness in it that tugged at something deep inside me. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Daniel had mentioned needing extra help. Our household had grown busy. My granddaughter Leela had just started a demanding job, and my grandson Marcus was preparing for his final exams. I was old, my knees unreliable, my hands stiff in the mornings. A helper made sense. Still, as Miriam stepped fully into the house, I felt a strange flutter in my chest. Not fear. Not exactly. More like the sensation you get when a storm is forming far away, too distant to hear, but close enough for the air to change. I watched her as she moved through the kitchen with Daniel. She worked quietly, efficiently. Within an hour, she had learned where we kept the spices, the plates, the cleaning cloths. She asked few questions. She seemed to understand things before they were explained. That evening, during dinner, she kept her distance, eating alone in the small back room we used for storage. I noticed Leela glancing toward the hallway more than once. "She's very quiet," Leela whispered to me after we finished eating. "Quiet people listen more," I replied. "That is not a bad thing." But as the days passed, I began to notice details that settled in my mind like pebbles in a shoe. Small things, easy to ignore, impossible to forget. Miriam woke before everyone else. I would hear the faint sound of water running at dawn, the gentle clink of dishes. By the time I shuffled into the kitchen, leaning on my cane, breakfast was already prepared. The table would be set perfectly, as if measured by an invisible ruler. "Good morning, ma'am," she would say, offering me tea. Her politeness was flawless, yet there was a distance in her eyes, a careful wall she never lowered. I tried to engage her in conversation. "Do you have family?" I asked one morning. She hesitated for a fraction of a second. It was brief, but I saw it. "Yes," she said, "4 children." I nearly dropped my cup. 4, that is a blessing. Her lips curved into a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "They are my world." "Where are they?" I asked gently. "With a neighbor," she replied quickly. "For now." Something in the way she said "for now" lingered in the air between us. I wanted to ask more, but her expression closed like a door. I recognized that look. It was the face of someone protecting a fragile truth. Over the next week, Miriam became a quiet rhythm in our household. The floors shone. The laundry smelled of fresh soap. Even the garden, which I had neglected for months, began to bloom under her care. She moved through our lives like a careful breeze, touching everything without disturbing it. Yet I sensed an undercurrent of tension in Daniel. He was kinder to her than I expected, his voice softer when he spoke to her. Sometimes I would catch them exchanging glances heavy with unspoken meaning. When I entered the room, the air would shift, conversations stopping mid-sentence. One afternoon, I found Miriam sitting alone at the kitchen table, staring at a photograph she held in trembling hands. It was a picture of 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls, clustered together, their smiles bright and unguarded. "They are beautiful," I said softly. She looked up startled, then nodded. "Thank you. You must miss them terribly." Her fingers tightened around the photo. For a moment I thought she might cry, but she inhaled slowly, mastering herself. "I will bring them here soon," she whispered. The certainty in her voice sent a chill through me. "Here," I repeated. She seemed to realize what she had said and quickly stood up, tucking the photograph away. I hope to find a better place soon." But the words had already settled in my heart like a stone. That evening, I confronted Daniel. We were alone in the living room, the television murmuring softly in the background. "She plans to bring her children here," I said. Daniel's shoulders stiffened. He rubbed his forehead, avoiding my gaze. "Mom, it's complicated." "Complicated things usually hide simple truths," I replied. "Tell me." He sighed heavily. "She's going through a difficult time. They have nowhere else to go. It would only be temporary." "Temporary," I repeated slowly. "4 children in this house is not a small matter, Daniel." "I know," he said quickly. "But we can help, we have space, and she deserves a chance." There was a desperation in his voice that unsettled me. My son was a good man, but he was not impulsive. He weighed decisions carefully. This felt different, urgent. "Does the rest of the family know?" I asked. "I'll tell them," he said. "Please, Mom, trust me." I wanted to. A mother's heart is built on trust in her children. But that night, sleep avoided me. I lay awake listening to the house breathe, every creak and whisper magnified in the darkness. My thoughts circled around Miriam and her children, around the strange intensity in Daniel's eyes. 2 days later, the storm arrived. It was late afternoon when a battered taxi pulled up in front of our gate. I was watering the garden when I saw it. My hands froze on the hose as the door opened and a small boy stepped out, clutching a worn backpack. He looked around nervously, his eyes wide. Then another child emerged, and another, and another. 4 children stood on the sidewalk, their belongings piled at their feet. Miriam stepped out last, her face pale but resolute. When she saw me, she offered a tentative smile. Daniel appeared behind me, his expression tight with anticipation. "Mom," he said quietly, "they're here." The world seemed to tilt slightly. The laughter of the children drifted toward me, fragile and uncertain. They looked so small standing outside our gate, like birds caught in a sudden storm. Neighbors began to peek through their windows. I felt their curiosity pressing against my skin. This was no small arrival. This was a declaration. Miriam guided the children toward us. "Say hello," she urged gently. The eldest girl stepped forward. "Good afternoon, ma'am," she said politely. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. I saw fear in her eyes and hope, a dangerous combination. I looked at Daniel. He nodded almost imperceptibly, pleading with me in silence. In that moment, I understood that whatever this was, it had already begun. The decision had been made before I was invited to witness it. The children were not visitors. They were arrivals. I forced a smile and opened the gate. "Welcome," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. As they crossed the threshold, the air in our home changed. It was as if the walls themselves inhaled sharply. The children stepped inside cautiously, their eyes darting around the unfamiliar space. Miriam followed them, carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken stories. The house, once quiet and predictable, filled with new sounds, soft footsteps, whispered questions, the rustle of bags being unpacked. Leela and Marcus stood frozen in the hallway, their shock mirrored in their faces. Daniel tried to explain, his words tumbling over each other. "It's temporary," he repeated. "We're just helping." But I barely heard him. My gaze was fixed on Miriam. She stood in the center of the living room, her children gathered around her like satellites orbiting a fragile sun. Her eyes met mine, and in them I saw gratitude and something else. A secret. It flickered there for only a second, but it was enough. Enough to send a ripple of unease through my bones. As evening fell, the house struggled to contain its new reality. The children were assigned rooms. Extra mattresses appeared. The dinner table stretched to accommodate more plates. Conversations stumbled and stuttered, everyone careful, polite, pretending this was normal. But beneath the surface, tension coiled tightly. I watched Miriam as she helped her children settle in. Her movements were gentle, protective. She whispered reassurances, smoothing their hair, tucking blankets around their small bodies. She looked less like a worker and more like something else, something deeply rooted in our home. When she finally straightened and turned toward me, exhaustion etched into her features, she offered a quiet thank you. I nodded, unable to find words. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the unfamiliar rhythm of extra footsteps and muffled voices, a single thought echoed relentlessly in my mind. We had not simply opened our doors to a woman and her children. We had invited a mystery into the heart of our family. And I felt, with a certainty that chilled me to the core, that nothing in our lives would ever be the same again. The first morning after the children arrived, I woke before the sun, my heart already restless inside my chest. For years, my mornings had followed the same gentle pattern. I would sit at the edge of my bed, stretch my aching fingers, and listen to the quiet hum of the house. Silence had been my oldest companion, but that morning, the silence was broken. I heard whispers. Soft, hurried voices traveled through the hallway like cautious footsteps. A cupboard opened. A spoon clinked against ceramic. Then a child's muffled laugh quickly shushed. I wrapped my shawl around my shoulders and stepped into the corridor. The air smelled different, warmer, heavier, filled with the scent of frying eggs and unfamiliar soap. When I entered the kitchen, I found Miriam standing at the stove with the eldest girl beside her, slicing bread with careful concentration. The younger children sat at the table, their feet dangling above the floor. They froze when they saw me, their eyes wide with the instinctive fear of children who had learned not to take up too much space. "Good morning," I said gently. Miriam turned, surprised. "Ma'am, you should have rested. I was bringing tea to your room." "I have been making my own tea since before you were born," I replied with a small smile. The tension in the room eased slightly. The little boy closest to me offered a shy grin. There was a sweetness in his face that tugged at my heart. "What are your names?" I asked. The children looked at Miriam, waiting for permission. She nodded. "I'm Hannah," said the eldest girl. "Jonah," whispered the boy. The two younger ones introduced themselves in voices so soft I almost missed their words. I repeated each name carefully, committing them to memory. Names are powerful things. They anchor people to the world. As we ate together, I studied the way Miriam moved around her children. She anticipated their needs before they spoke. A glass of water appeared when a cough interrupted breakfast. A napkin was offered the moment a crumb fell. Her attention never wandered far from them. But what struck me most was the way Daniel watched them. He stood in the doorway with his coffee, silent and observant. His gaze lingered on the children with an intensity that unsettled me. There was tenderness there, yes, but also guilt. A heavy, suffocating guilt that seemed to press down on his shoulders. When he noticed me looking, he quickly forced a smile. "They're settling in well," he said. I nodded slowly. Children adapt faster than adults. He flinched just slightly. It was enough. As the days unfolded, the house transformed into something I barely recognized. Laughter echoed through the halls, followed by sudden silences whenever an adult entered the room. Toys appeared in corners where there had once been only dust. The garden filled with the sound of running feet. On the surface, it was a lively, joyful change. But beneath it, I sensed a current of unease threading through every interaction. Leela struggled the most. She tried to be kind, helping the children with their homework and sharing her old books. But I often found her sitting alone on the porch, her jaw tight. "It feels like we're guests in our own home," she admitted one evening. "They are guests too," I reminded her. She shook her head. "Guests don't unpack their entire lives, Grandma." Her words lingered with me long after she went inside. I began to notice patterns, small inconsistencies that pricked at my intuition. Miriam rarely left the house alone. When she did, Daniel insisted on driving her. Their conversations during these trips were brief and hushed. When they returned, the air around them felt charged, as if words had been spoken that were not meant to be heard. One afternoon, I walked past the study and heard voices behind the closed door. "You promised," Miriam was saying. Her tone was low but firm. "I know," Daniel replied. "I'm trying to fix this." Trying is not enough anymore. I paused, my hand hovering over the doorknob. My heart pounded in my ears. I knew I should walk away. Eavesdropping is a dangerous habit. It reveals truths you may not be ready to carry. But my feet refused to move. "They deserve stability," Miriam continued. "They deserve honesty." "And they'll have it," Daniel said quickly. "Just give me more time." Time for what? The question echoed in my mind as I retreated silently down the hallway. A cold weight settled in my stomach. This was no simple act of charity. Something deeper bound my son to this woman and her children. That night I found sleep impossible again. Memories drifted through my thoughts, moments I had dismissed at the time but now returned with sharp clarity. Daniel's sudden trips out of town over the past few years, his distracted demeanor, the way he had avoided certain questions with practiced ease. Had I been blind? The following week brought another unsettling discovery. I was searching for an old photo album in the storage room when I noticed a familiar suitcase tucked behind a stack of boxes. It was Daniel's, one he hadn't used in years. Curiosity tugged at me. I opened it carefully. Inside were children's drawings. Dozens of them. Crayon sketches of stick figures holding hands. A tall man stood at the center of nearly every picture. His hair was dark, his smile wide. Above his head, written in uneven letters, was a single word. "Daddy." My breath caught in my throat. The room seemed to shrink around me. I sank onto a nearby chair, the drawings trembling in my hands. They were old. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges. These were not recent creations. They were fragments of a hidden history, preserved in silence. Footsteps approached in the hallway. I quickly closed the suitcase, my heart racing. Miriam appeared in the doorway, her expression softening when she saw me. "Are you all right, ma'am?" she asked. For a moment, I considered confronting her. The questions burned on my tongue, but something in her eyes, an ocean of exhaustion and guarded hope, stopped me. "I was looking for an album," I said quietly. "I must have taken a wrong turn." She stepped into the room and gently moved the suitcase aside, as if shielding it from view. "This place is easy to get lost in," she said. Our gazes met. In that silent exchange, I felt the weight of unspoken knowledge passing between us. She knew that I knew something, and I knew she was waiting for me to decide what to do with it. I returned to my room in a daze. The drawings replayed in my mind like a haunting melody. The man in those pictures, it was Daniel. I would recognize my son's silhouette anywhere. The implications were staggering. Yet doubt clung stubbornly to me. Assumptions can destroy families. I needed certainty, not suspicion. So I began to watch more closely. I observed the children when they thought no one was paying attention. The way Jonah tilted his head when he laughed, exactly like Daniel. The eldest girl's serious eyes mirrored my son in moments of concentration. Even their gestures carried echoes of him. It was like watching fragments of Daniel's childhood, walking through my home. The tension in the household thickened. Leela and Marcus sensed it too, though they could not name it. Conversations became strained. Meals were quieter. Miriam moved through the house with increasing caution, her smile fading at the edges. One evening, a storm rolled in without warning. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rattled the walls. The children huddled in the living room, their faces pale with fear. I joined them, wrapping a blanket around their small shoulders. "It's just the sky arguing with itself," I told them softly. "It always makes up in the end." They smiled weakly. Miriam sat across from us, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Daniel stood by the window, watching the storm with a distant expression. A sudden crack of thunder made the youngest child burst into tears. Instinctively, Daniel rushed forward and scooped her into his arms. She clung to him without hesitation, burying her face in his chest. "It's okay," he murmured. "I've got you." The room fell silent. There was something profoundly intimate in that moment, the ease with which she trusted him, the way his arms wrapped around her with practiced familiarity. It was not the awkward comfort of a stranger. It was the instinctive embrace of a father. My heart ached with the weight of realization. Miriam's eyes met mine across the room. They shimmered with unshed tears and a plea I could not ignore. She was not asking for forgiveness. She was asking for understanding. The storm outside raged on, but a greater storm had settled within our walls. Truth pressed against the fragile surface of our family, threatening to break through at any moment. And as I watched my son hold that trembling child, I knew with chilling certainty that the mystery surrounding Miriam and her children was no longer a distant shadow. It was standing in the center of our living room, breathing the same air as the rest of us. I just didn't yet know how deep its roots reached, or how much it would demand from us when it finally revealed itself. After the night of the storm, the house felt like a stage after a performance. Everything looked the same, but the air carried the memory of something irreversible. I could no longer pretend that Miriam and her children were simply guests. The truth hovered around us like a scent no one acknowledged, but everyone could smell. It followed me through the hallways, sat beside me at the dining table, and lay awake with me in the darkness. At my age, intuition is not a whisper. It is a steady drumbeat you learn to respect. The next morning, I found Miriam alone in the garden. The children were inside with Leela, their laughter drifting faintly through the open windows. Miriam knelt in the soil, her fingers gently pressing seeds into the earth. She looked peaceful there, bathed in the soft light of early sun. I approached slowly, my cane sinking slightly into the grass. "You have a gentle touch with plants," I said. She glanced up and smiled faintly. "They respond to patience." "So do people," I replied, lowering myself onto the bench beside her. For a moment, we sat in silence, listening to birds weave their songs through the air. I felt the weight of my questions pressing against my ribs. "Miriam," I began carefully, "how long have you known my son?" Her hands stilled in the soil. A shadow crossed her face. "A few years," she said. "Years is a long time to remain a stranger," I said softly. She wiped her hands on her dress and stood, turning to face me fully. Her eyes were guarded, but there was a tremor beneath her calm. "I never intended to become part of your family's life like this," she said. "Things changed." "Things always change," I murmured, "but they rarely do so without leaving footprints. I have seen some of those footprints, Miriam." Her breath caught. The garden seemed to shrink around us, the air thick with unspoken words. "I found the drawings," I said gently. For a heartbeat, her composure shattered. Pain flashed across her face, raw and unfiltered. She looked away, her shoulders sagging as if a great weight had settled upon them. "I tried to keep them hidden," she whispered, "not out of shame, but out of fear." "Fear of what?" "Of breaking something that cannot be repaired." Her words settled heavily between us. I felt a deep ache in my chest, a mixture of sorrow and reluctant understanding. "Are they his?" I asked quietly. Tears welled in her eyes. She did not speak, but her silence was answer enough. I closed my eyes, letting the truth wash over me. When I opened them again, the world looked sharper, more fragile. "Does Daniel intend to tell us?" I asked. "He wants to," she said quickly. "But he is afraid. He thinks you will hate him, that the family will fall apart." I let out a slow breath. Anger flickered within me, not a blazing fire, but a steady burn. My son had carried this secret for years, allowing it to grow roots in the dark. "Secrets are like mold," I said quietly. "They thrive in hidden places, but when exposed to light, they can still poison what they touch." Miriam's tears spilled over, tracing silent paths down her cheeks. "I never wanted to take anything from you," she said. "I only wanted my children to have a father who acknowledged them. They have lived in the shadows for too long." Her words pierced me. I saw, in that moment, not a mysterious intruder, but a mother fighting for her children's place in the world. "I do not hate you," I said softly, "but I fear what this truth will do to us." She nodded, her voice breaking. "So do I." That evening, I called Daniel into my room. He entered with the wary expression of a man approaching a verdict. "Sit," I told him. He obeyed, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. For a long moment, we simply looked at each other. I saw the boy he had been flickering behind the man he had become. "I spoke with Miriam," I said. His face drained of color. "Mom, I can explain." "You will," I interrupted gently. "But first, I want you to listen." He fell silent. "I have lived a long life," I continued. "Long enough to know that love is complicated. It does not always follow the paths we design for it. But responsibility is not complicated. When we bring life into this world, we owe it truth and protection." Tears glistened in his eyes. "I was afraid," he whispered. "I made mistakes. I thought I could keep everything separate, my family here and them. But the walls I built started closing in." "Why now?" I asked. "Why bring them here after all this time?" He swallowed hard. "Their landlord sold the building. They were going to be on the street. I couldn't let that happen. I've been supporting them financially, but it wasn't enough anymore. They needed stability. They needed me." "And what about us?" I asked quietly. His voice cracked. "I never wanted to hurt you. I just didn't know how to tell you the truth without losing everything." His confession hung in the air like fragile glass. I felt my anger soften, replaced by a profound sadness. My son had been living a divided life, torn between fear and love. "You should have trusted us," I said gently. "Families survive storms when they face them together. Hiding from the rain only makes it colder when it finally falls." He bowed his head, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I reached out and placed my hand over his. "We cannot change the past," I said, "but we can decide what to do with the present." The next days were a delicate dance of revelations. Daniel gathered the family in the living room and spoke with trembling honesty. Leela's face went pale. Marcus stared at the floor, his jaw clenched. The children sat close to Miriam, sensing the gravity of the moment. When Daniel finished, a heavy silence settled over us. "They're my children," he said finally, "and I want to be part of their lives openly. I know I've betrayed your trust, but I'm asking for a chance to make things right." Leela's eyes filled with tears. "You lied to us for years," she whispered. "I know," he said hoarsely, "and I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn your forgiveness." No one spoke for a long time. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then the eldest girl, Hannah, stood up. Her small voice trembled, but her words were clear. "We didn't want to cause trouble," she said. "We just wanted a home." Her innocence cut through the tension like a blade. I saw Leela's expression soften, her anger warring with compassion. This was the hidden truth laid bare. Not a scandal, not a villainous betrayal, but a tangled web of human frailty and desperate love. As I looked around the room, at the faces etched with pain and hope, I understood that our family stood at a crossroads. We could let this truth tear us apart, or we could allow it to reshape us into something new. The choice was terrifying. And it was only the beginning. After the truth was spoken aloud, our house did not explode into chaos the way I had secretly feared. Instead, it grew unbearably quiet. Silence settled over us like heavy dust. We moved through the days carefully, each of us carrying private storms behind polite expressions. The children sensed the shift immediately. Their laughter softened. Their footsteps became cautious again, as if they were afraid the floor beneath them might give way. I watched them closely during that fragile week. Children are mirrors. They reflect the emotions adults try so desperately to hide. Hannah, who had once spoken with shy confidence, now measured every word. Jonah clung to Miriam more often, his small hand always searching for her dress. The youngest two followed Daniel with wide, uncertain eyes, as if trying to memorize the shape of a father they were only just allowed to claim. Daniel tried to bridge the growing distance in the family. He cooked dinners he barely knew how to prepare. He offered awkward jokes that fell flat in the tense air. His guilt hung around him like a shadow that no light could erase. One evening, I found him sitting alone at the dining table long after everyone had gone to bed. A single lamp cast a tired circle of light around him. Papers were spread across the table, documents, forms, and what looked like school applications. "You cannot fix a broken heart with paperwork," I said softly as I approached. He looked up, startled. His eyes were red with exhaustion. "I'm trying to make things official," he murmured. "Legal guardianship, school transfers, a bigger place for them for all of us." "For all of us," I repeated, lowering myself into the chair across from him. The words trembled between hope and desperation. "I've been selfish," he continued. "For years, I convinced myself that keeping my lives separate was protecting everyone. But all I did was delay the pain. And now I'm asking you all to carry the weight of my choices." His voice cracked. He pressed his palms against his eyes like a man trying to hold himself together. I reached across the table and covered his hand with mine. "Pain shared is lighter than pain hidden," I said, "but there is something you still haven't told me." He froze. I had felt it for days, a missing piece in the story, a quiet tension that hummed beneath every conversation. Miriam carried it in the stiffness of her shoulders. Daniel avoided it with careful precision. "What happened between you and Miriam?" I asked gently. "Not the children, the beginning." Daniel's breath shuddered out of him. "She was never just my worker," he whispered. "She worked at the community clinic where I volunteered. We met during one of the hardest times of her life. Her husband had abandoned her. She was raising 4 children alone, drowning in debt. I started helping. At first it was just practical, groceries, school fees. And then, I prompted softly, I fell in love with her strength," he admitted. "With the way she refused to break, but I was a coward. I didn't want to disrupt the life I had built. I told myself it was temporary, that I could care for them without changing anything here." His words tasted bitter in the air. "When she became pregnant with the youngest," he continued, his voice barely audible, "I panicked. I promised I would support them, but I begged her not to force me to choose publicly. She agreed for the children's sake. We both lived in that lie, thinking we were protecting them." A sharp ache pierced my chest. "And now?" I asked. "Now she's done hiding," he said. "She told me she would not let her children grow up believing they were secrets. When they lost their home, it was the final push. She said we either become a real family or she walks away and raises them alone without me." The weight of his confession pressed down on me. This was not just about shelter or charity. It was about identity, about children demanding the right to exist in the open. The next day, the fragile balance we had been maintaining shattered. It happened during breakfast. Leela arrived at the table with her phone clenched tightly in her hand, her face pale with fury. She looked at Daniel, then at Miriam, and finally at the children. "Is it true?" she demanded. The room stilled. Daniel frowned. "What are you talking about?" She threw the phone onto the table. On the screen was a message thread, screenshots from social media. Neighbors had been gossiping. Someone had posted a photo of Miriam and the children entering our house, accompanied by cruel speculation. "He's been hiding a second family for years. That poor old woman probably doesn't even know." The words burned like acid. "I found out from strangers," Leela said, her voice shaking. "Our private life is entertainment for the entire neighborhood." Miriam's face drained of color. The children stared at the phone, confusion clouding their features. "I never wanted this," Miriam whispered. "None of us did," Leela snapped. "But we're the ones who have to live with it now." Hannah pushed back her chair suddenly. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "We didn't ask for this," she cried. "We just wanted to be with our father." Her voice cracked on the last word, and the room fell into stunned silence. "Father?" The word rang through the air like a bell. There was no taking it back. no softening its edges. Leela's anger faltered. She looked at Hannah, really looked at her, and something shifted in her expression. The girl's pain was raw, undeniable. It stripped away the layers of scandal and exposed the simple truth beneath, a child longing to belong. Miriam wrapped her arms around Hannah, her own tears falling freely now. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry you're caught in this." Daniel stood frozen, shame etched into every line of his face. He looked at his children, both the ones he had raised openly and the ones he had hidden, and I saw the full weight of his choices crash down upon him. That was the moment the emotional climax truly arrived. Not in shouting or accusations, but in the quiet recognition that we were all wounded by the same blade. I rose slowly from my chair, my joints protesting, and walked to Hannah. I knelt in front of her, taking her trembling hands in mine. "Listen to me," I said gently. "You are not a mistake. None of you are. Adults make complicated decisions, and sometimes those decisions cast long shadows. But children are never the shadows. They are the light that forces us to see clearly." Hannah's sobs softened into quiet hiccups. The other children watched me with wide, tearful eyes. I turned to Leela. "And you," I said softly, "have every right to feel hurt. But anger aimed at children is like throwing stones at your own reflection. It only breaks what you love." Leela's shoulders sagged. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she looked at her half-siblings. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached across the table and took Hannah's hand. "I'm not angry at you," she whispered. "I'm angry at the situation, and I don't know how to fix it yet." Hannah squeezed her hand tightly. "We can figure it out together," she said in a small, hopeful voice. In that fragile exchange, something inside our family cracked open, not to destroy us, but to let truth breathe. Daniel sank into his chair, covering his face with his hands. His sobs were quiet but unstoppable. Miriam stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. They looked like two people stripped bare by honesty, terrified of what would come next. As I looked around the table, at the tangled web of pain and love binding us together, I understood the true revelation. This woman and her children were not intruders in our story. They were chapters we had refused to read. And now that the pages were open, we had a choice: close the book in fear or continue reading and accept the complicated beauty of what lay inside. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of generations in my chest. "This family," I said quietly, "is changing. We can mourn the version we thought we had, or we can build a new one stronger for its honesty. But we will not let shame write our future." The words hung in the air, fragile and powerful. For the first time since Miriam had crossed our threshold, I saw a flicker of genuine hope in every face around the table. The truth had broken us open. Now it was up to us to decide whether we would bleed or heal. In the weeks that followed, healing did not arrive like sunlight flooding a dark room. It came quietly, in fragments. At my age, I have learned that families do not mend through grand speeches or dramatic gestures. They heal in the smallest moments, moments so ordinary you might miss them if you are not paying attention. The first sign came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting on the porch shelling peas into a metal bowl, my fingers moving with the slow rhythm of habit. The air was warm, thick with the scent of approaching rain. Inside the house, I heard laughter, real laughter, not the cautious kind we had been practicing. Curious, I leaned forward and peered through the open window. Leela was on the floor with the children, a board game spread between them. Jonah accused her of cheating with exaggerated seriousness, and she gasped in mock offense. Even Marcus, who had kept his distance since the revelation, hovered nearby, pretending not to watch while secretly smiling. Miriam stood in the doorway, her hand covering her mouth as she laughed softly. Daniel was beside her, his arm brushing hers in a gesture that was tentative but honest. They looked like two people learning how to stand in the light after years of hiding in shadows. Something in my chest loosened. Healing, I realized, often begins with laughter. It is the body's way of remembering that joy is still possible. Life did not suddenly become simple. The gossip outside our walls did not disappear. Neighbors whispered. Some friends grew distant. Every trip to the market carried the weight of curious stares. But inside our home, a quiet transformation was taking place. Daniel kept his promise. He arranged counseling for the entire family. At first, the sessions were stiff and uncomfortable. Words stumbled out of us like strangers, but slowly we began to speak with honesty that felt both terrifying and freeing. I learned things about my grandchildren, the fears they had buried, the resentments they had carried in silence. Leela confessed that she felt replaced, as if her father had built another life where she did not exist. Marcus admitted he was ashamed of caring what others thought. And the children, Miriam's children, Daniel's children, shared their own hidden wounds. Hannah spoke about years of pretending her father was a distant relative. Jonah described the ache of watching other children run into their father's arms at school events. Their words wove together into a tapestry of shared pain. But pain acknowledged is pain that can begin to heal. One evening, after a particularly emotional session, the family gathered in the living room. The air was heavy with vulnerability. No one seemed to know what to say. Then the youngest child climbed into Daniel's lap and rested her head against his chest. "Are we a real family now?" she asked softly. The question hung in the air, fragile as glass. Daniel's arms tightened around her. Tears filled his eyes, but his voice was steady. "We were always real," he said. "We were just afraid to admit it." I watched as those words settled over the room. They did not erase the past, but they softened its edges. For the first time, I saw my family not as something broken, but as something reshaped, wider, more complicated, and strangely more honest. As months passed, the house found a new rhythm. The children started school nearby. Their backpacks lined up by the door became a daily reminder of the future unfolding before us. Mornings were chaotic and loud, filled with misplaced shoes and hurried breakfasts. Even my quiet knitting corner was often invaded by small hands eager to learn. Miriam no longer moved through the house like a guest. She carried herself with a cautious confidence, as if she were slowly allowing herself to believe she belonged. She and I developed a gentle companionship, built on shared routines and unspoken understanding. Sometimes we would sit together in the garden at dusk, watching the sky melt into shades of gold and purple. "I still worry," she admitted one evening, "that one day this peace will disappear, that we will wake up and realize it was only temporary." I reached for her hand, my fingers warm against hers. "Peace is always temporary," I said softly. "That is what makes it precious. We do not protect it by fearing its loss. We protect it by living fully while we have it." She smiled, her eyes shining with quiet gratitude. Daniel changed too. The weight of secrecy had carved deep lines into his face over the years. Without it, he seemed lighter, still flawed, still human, but more present. He attended school events openly, standing beside Miriam with a pride that needed no explanation. Watching him embrace all his children without hesitation filled me with a bittersweet ache. I mourned the years we had lost to silence, but I also felt a fierce pride in the man he was becoming. One night, long after everyone had gone to sleep, I wandered through the house. Moonlight spilled across the floors, illuminating the traces of our shared life, forgotten toys, folded laundry, a half-finished puzzle on the table. I paused outside the children's room. The door was slightly open. Inside, they slept in a tangle of blankets and soft breathing. Hannah lay closest to the door, her face peaceful in the dim light. I felt tears gather in my eyes. These children had arrived as a mystery, wrapped in secrecy and fear. They had unsettled our world, forcing us to confront truths we would have preferred to ignore. And yet, standing there in the quiet of the night, I could not imagine our home without them. They were not an intrusion. They were an expansion. I returned to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, my heart full. Life had taught me many lessons, but this one felt carved deeper than the rest. Families are not defined by the stories we tell the world. They are defined by the truths we dare to live with each other. We had been tested by secrecy, shaken by revelation, and scarred by judgment. But in choosing honesty over fear, we had discovered a strength I did not know we possessed. I lay down and listened to the house breathe around me, the soft chorus of sleeping voices, the gentle creak of settling wood. It was the sound of a family imperfect and whole. As sleep finally claimed me, a single thought settled gently in my heart. Love does not arrive in the shapes we expect. Sometimes it comes disguised as disruption, forcing open doors we thought were locked forever. But if we are brave enough to welcome it, even in its most complicated form, it can build a home larger than we ever imagined. And in that home, there is room for every truth we carry.